We did an event in a co-working space in Leamington in October. Yeah, it was the One Milk and that was so nice. These sort of things really lovely. I love the brickwork. I like the fact that they just finished it on the back. And then feel too cold or industrial. It's quite no.
Hello. Hello everyone. Welcome to Careers and Games. My name is Kay. I'm the Careers Manager at ScreenSkills. We're a training and skills organisation. We work across the screen industry, so TV, film, games, animation, and VFX. And we have lots of great careers resources on our website. So you've all received a goodie bag with our lovely career maps. We also have lesson plans that you can download for free on our website. We have a new suite of e-learning modules, employability e-learning modules. So it's great resource for students to get tips about finding a job, how to prepare for an interview. We've got industry people talking on camera about sharing their tips. We also have immersive films. So we have an immersive film on a live film set and a post-production house. So you get a chance to see behind the scenes. So we've got lots and lots of things at ScreenSkills, bursaries. We've got really flexible bursaries. So if you're looking for funding for training, driving license, childcare, we also offer that as well. So there's lots and lots of things. So we are here today for Careers and Games. We're hosting this event with Into Games. And they'll be presenting the speakers shortly. This event is funded by BFI lottery funding. Just a few health and safety. So we've got toilets upstairs on my right, and the fire escape is just through the entrance that you came through. So I hope you have a really great event. Do sign up to our newsletter to find out about more events. And I'm going to hand you over to Brandon to tell you a bit about the speakers that we have ahead. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kay. I'm literally just going to be up for 2 seconds, just introducing the first person. The first speaker that we have is absolutely brilliant Mal Abbas, who runs Biome Collective. I'm sure he'll be able to tell you plenty more about it, but they're a Dundee-based games studio who do a lot of really great creative experimental work. And he's going to tell you a little bit more about some of the things from the games industry that you might not know, potential applications, jobs, ways that games can be used outside of what you maybe have heard of before. So without further ado, I'll hand over to the wonderful Mal. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Oh, brilliant. Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. Hi everyone. I'm Malath Abbas, and I'm kind of a creative producer and games designer who primarily works at Biome Collective, a studio and co-working space I founded about 7 years ago. I also sit on the board of Creative Scotland, which has given me a great kind of oversight of kind of the national agenda in terms of screen and games, etc. Does that work? Yes. So I'm actually originally from Iraq. I came to the UK in '91 as a child, and I grew up in Liverpool, where I did a lot of my kind of early kind of career days and all my studies in Liverpool. And then I came to settle in Dundee about 10 years ago. And being from Baghdad, growing up in Liverpool, Dundee was quite a struggle for me initially. It was too small. But I'm happily married and started a family here, so it's all good now. And yeah, I kind of started my journey through a passion of Japanese comics and anime to various different kind of comics and video games. So I kind of grew up playing games in the kind of late 90s, etc. And I was really rubbish at school. I really struggled. In fact, I kind of got progressively worse from GCSEs to A-levels. I actually ended up failing my GCSE just about, completely failed my A-levels, managed to get onto a Polymath Access course, stumbled upon a HND, ended up doing a computer games a Bachelor of Science, realizing I hate coding, but I could do it, and then did an animation master's when I was 26, 27. That was the first time I actually properly engaged with education. Prior to that, I really struggled. I never enjoyed it. So that was the first time I actually enjoyed it, which is a year-long intensive course, which kind of set me straight in terms of what I wanted to do in terms of the industry.
For the live stream.
Yeah, how's that? Is that all right? Cool. So what was interesting for me in terms of careers advice was that in school, back in the day, they brought a machine in, and you had to kind of mark with a pencil. I'm not sure if you guys are similar age to me, 40-year-olds. It was a kind of a machine with questionnaires, and it was like a particular pencil, and it came out as a fashion designer. And I was bemused by that at the time, but it's really interesting because as a games designer, I've done things that are actually not too far from fashion design, to be honest with you. So I was quite impressed to go back to that kind of early days assessment. So I started working in Liverpool in an animation studio, even though I wanted to do games. There weren't jobs at the time. At the time, it was the economic crash. And so I was working in a cool animation studio. But then I had a graduate opportunity to come to Dundee. I was invited to be part of a graduate team to join Aberdeen University for a competition called Dare to be Digital. Now, in that competition, I ended up doing quite well. We got a BAFTA nomination for the work. And I got to appreciate Scotland and Dundee in terms of the games industry because there's a heritage here of games making. So yeah, Dundee's been really interesting, inspiring to me because it's quite a small city. It's very collaborative. So the creative industries as a whole are very collaborative and they communicate with each other, which is really brilliant. I'm going to talk to you very quickly about a few projects just to show you the kind of stuff I've done. And it's not necessarily a traditional path into games. And the past 10 years have been I've done all sorts of projects, shall we say. So part of Biome Collective, a co-working space and a studio I set up, which encourages collaboration and experimental work within games. So we're a bit of a community, actually. We're not just a studio, we're a bit of a community. We were based in the Vision. We don't actually have that space anymore because of the pandemic. There's about 25 of us at the moment. It's a membership-based organization. And there's freelancers, contractors, and academics that are part of the organization. And in that kind of past 7 years or so, I've had the privilege of working on a range of projects. And I'll just run you through some of them. I started out doing a lot of kind of art-based tasks, be it character design within games, 2D stuff. This is a project for the National Museum up in Edinburgh. This is a game we pitched to Sony many, many years ago. Did a lot of 3D work because I'm kind of trained as a 3D artist. Lots of problem-solving skills involved in 3D art. So made lots of kind of flash games for various websites. A lot of these were for the National Museum up in Edinburgh. A lot of experimental work with projection mapping. So this is the kind of stuff, I kind of help expand my horizon in terms of what's possible. So we've done a lot of cool interactive projection mapping stuff. A lot of projection stuff tends to be animation-based. We make it interactive. It's another piece of work. It's the McManus. We did a cool show there. We made the AR game, augmented reality game, a GPS game, about 8 years ago. That predates Pokemon Go by like 4 or 5 years. So we've been able to be ahead of the curve by being quite experimental. So you can imagine the kind of business opportunities that could afford you if you get things right. We do a lot of workshops for young people. So we did a project here with Hot Chocolate Trust, if you know them in the Steeple in the city, an amazing organization that works with young people that are struggling. So we've done at least 1 year-long collaboration with them where we teach them how to make games, etc. We do a lot of workshops with other organizations in the creative industries. So this is the Scottish Dance Theatre, world-renowned, obviously based in Dundee, the Rep. This was us doing a workshop with them, introducing games design to them, and vice versa. They helped us with understanding their creative process as dancers. We also put on an event. This is Arcadia. We took over Westwood Works a good few years ago. We've also done it with the V&A. This was a kind of celebration of independent games and a massive party in a warehouse. So again, this is the kind of stuff I didn't think I'd ever do an event before. Organizing a conference. I ended up doing that. Just cause. This is an example project. This is a game called Killbox. How am I doing on time, by the way? I'm good. Okay. Okay, sure.
Sound on the live stream, so we're just going to put the mic here. So just
Yeah,
bear
is that
with me
okay?
for 1 second, and then we'll see if everything. Sorry, everyone watching online. We will get through it. There we go. Give that a go.
Is that okay? Yeah. Yeah. Cool. I'm going to talk about a few projects in particular. So this project is called Killbox. We developed this about 7 years ago, and this ended up being a BAFTA Scotland nominated project. So in this instance, we made a game about drone warfare. And in the game, you play as a pilot of a drone, and this is what you see, kind of a top-down view. But you play as a child on the ground, so we flip it, and that's the kind of view you see. Quite a politically charged project. This works as an online game that you can download, but also it works as an exhibition piece. This has been touring around the world for the past 4 or 5 years. From a design point of view, it started out as a very simple 2-player experience. We would prototype and showcase it throughout development. So this is, I think, DNA Design Week in London. This was a We Throw Switches event in Edinburgh. This was at Berlin, a Maze Festival. And again, I never thought I'd make games and I'd take them to Berlin, for example, right? We ended up designing a bespoke hardware for a desk for the thing. Again, I never thought I'd be a product designer, but then me contributing to a product as a game designer. Ended up, this for the Dundee Design Festival, we got this manufactured for us. Ended up going to Neon Digital Arts Festival, whereby it became more kind of an art house kind of piece, and also a piece of performance. So we had a performer that would ask people when they finished playing the game, how many people they killed. So it became quite a moving experience. This project, again, a lot of my work has gone from digital to physical. This is Spiel, and Spiel was the Scotland entry to the London Design Biennale in 2018. So we were tasked with creating an installation that would explore mental health. So we designed a unique piece of hardware that would create a unique experience in a physical space. We had the dimensions of a room at Somerset House in London. That's all we had. We weren't able to visit. Very short turnaround time. And we designed this arcade cabinet that housed a projector that would project onto a domed security mirror that would fill an entire room. So it became a 360 virtual experience. We're using a single light source. And we had like 1 million button presses over the month during the Biennale. So you can see that light would go from here all the way to there. Again, I never thought I'd be making games and I'd be designing weird, intricate objects that would delight people and start a conversation about mental health. This is our project for when the V&A opened. We were asked with coming up with something for the opening. At the time, because we're known for doing projection mapping, we said we could do that. They go back with the quote, it was going to be too expensive because it's a big building. You're going to have lots of kind of 4K projectors. So we said, you know what, we can do something else. How about, and this is using the power of Google, I've never done this before. We Googled stage light, that's the stage light down here. The high-end stage lights that they can move, they've got shutters that can create shape, and they can change color. So using those combination of quite simple actions, we're able to create a kind of almost like a projection mapping style show. So we had this kind of wireframe effect, it did all kinds of cool stuff on the, and this was live on BBC One at the time. So again, I never thought I'd do any of this. And it's important to note that the stuff I've done isn't the usual for most people. Most of my friends who work in games, they'll work in a studio that makes mobile games, or they'll work in a studio that makes console games. And it's very kind of defined roles and highly skilled, single role kind of jobs. But the stuff I've done, because it's kind of what I'm interested in, has allowed me to do all kinds of cool stuff, from being an artist designer to a producer, to being someone who's a trustee, a volunteer, sitting on boards, etc. And what I found interesting is a lot of that stuff has only been made possible because I work in games. And games is a very attractive proposition to most young people. And actually a lot of people who maybe of an old generation find it intriguing, but they don't fully understand it. So a lot of what the work I tend to do tends to be the kind of those conversations in between to encourage people that actually we're all into games actually. If you've ever played Scrabble or chess, you're a gamer. There's none of this kind of I'm a gamer, that person's not a gamer, that kind of stuff. We're all gamers at heart. And that's pretty much it. You can contact me at Biome Collective or at Maltron 3D. Thank you.
Okay, folks, thank you very much, Mal. That was wonderful. Next up, we've got the absolutely fantastic Brian Baglow. Brian Baglow is the director and founder of the Scottish Games Network and perhaps the most connected man in the Scottish games industry and perhaps beyond. Knows everyone, speaks to everyone, and knows as much as you can possibly know about the Scottish games industry. And he's here to talk to you a little bit about that space. So take it over to Brian. Thanks very much.
No pressure then. Okay. Thank you, folks. And before I start, just say Mal is a shining example of the games industry, the games ecosystem that I'm going to talk to you tonight about. I can do this next slide. I love technology. So before we start, I would like to introduce you to the largest Scottish city in the world. Does anyone know where this is? This is Los Santos. It has a population just short of 34 million. Created here in Scotland, it exists only online within the world of Grand Theft Auto. We're not doing too badly, folks. So, there are two things that every single person knows about Scotland's games industry. One is that we were a pioneer, and two is that we punch above our weight. And the next politician who says that to me will get that response in return. I'm not sure I can punch above my weight, but this is kind of a lazy shorthand because of some of the success that we've seen. Scotland does indeed have a proud legacy when it comes to video games, and Dundee has been the pioneering heart of it all. Way back in the 1980s, a bespectacled Cambridge professor called Clive Sinclair decided what the world really needed was an affordable home computer and came up with the ZX81. Sucked. Nobody bought one. But it proved the concept, and Sinclair ZX Spectrum went on to do quite well, manufactured by Timex here in Dundee. There is an entire documentary about the history of Lemmings, which goes through the number of these devices that fell off the back of lorries and found their way into, flats and student visits in Hilltown and everything. But because we had this subculture of games creation, because let's not forget, this was founded on a lie, right? I was there in the 1980s. I was 10 years old in 1980, and I told my parents what I had been told to say, which is, this is the future. This will help me with my homework. 22 years before Wikipedia, that was nonsense. So these were sold with the notion that mum was going to store her recipes, dad would do the accounts, and little Brian would sit there and learn about, quadratic equations. Absolute nonsense. What everyone did when they got one of these things was realise, actually you can play games, and that's quite good fun, even though it was on cassette tape and it took 50 minutes to load. But we ended up with a number of studios in and around Dundee, most notably DNA Design, who went on in 1991 to produce the film Lemmings. 30 years old this year, folks, but one of the first superstar smashes. This in turn inspired Abertay to create the world's first games degree. And Scotland went on to do more pioneering work. Digital Bridges, the world's first mobile games publisher, 8 years before the iPhone came out. I was there, I did it. I tried to persuade the mobile sector that games were worthwhile, and the games sector that mobile phones, the old Nokias, were a proper games device. I'm now doing this out of spite, not out of love. But these are now our cultural legacy, right? This is 30 years old. Grand Theft Auto 1997 is going to be 25 years old next year. This is not our cultural currency. And one of the issues is we've got two monster studios here in Scotland. We've got two companies that are working on absolutely enormous titles that are global outliers. In Edinburgh, we have Rockstar North, the company behind Grand Theft Auto, GTA Online, Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2. And here in Dundee, we've got 4G Studios, who are most famous for doing the console versions of Minecraft. Now, Minecraft has cruised past 200 million sales as of the beginning of this year, and GTA has actually updated the figures since I did this 4 weeks ago, and it's now 175 million sales and counting. The games industry is doing quite well. But those are just two of the studios that are in the country, but they're so enormous, they tend to obscure all the other good work that's going on out there. And let's make no mistake, video games is a big global business. The global games market in 2021 was worth $175.8 billion, right, on a global basis. Now, for context, Some of the other key digital sectors that being, key digital technology trends that are identified by the government, not just here in Scotland, but across the UK. Cybersecurity, we've had the cyber bus, we've had cyber implementation, cyber projects, 167.8 billion. Sorry, cyber, not quite good enough. AI, we now have our own AI strategy for the country, 93.53 billion. FinTech, they claim 187 billion, I'm not entirely sure. There's stuff that they're saying is FinTech that isn't really FinTech. But in this context, a career in video games is a very, very sensible thing, and it's only going to become more so for a number of very easy to see reasons. One is that video games straddles that sweet spot. We are part of the creative industries officially, we are part of the digital technology sector officially, and we combine all the best elements of both. We're creating projects, like Mal said earlier, that straddle the boundary between experiential and installation and art and experience and games and just good old-fashioned entertainment. But games are also now being seen in the classroom. They're being used for healthcare. If any of you have ever phoned in to vote somebody off strictly, you're gamifying your TV experience. If you've ever used a store card, you're gamifying your shopping. If you've got a fitness band or an Apple Watch, you're gamifying going outside. So the video game sector is becoming ubiquitous. We are now seeing games and game-like experiences emerge into so many other areas of our digital lives. But as of 2022, what does Scotland's video games ecosystem look like? We've got the two big studios that everybody knows, right? That's fine. But it conceals so many of the other good things that we have going on here. We have 7 universities producing games graduates all across the country. Abertay was number 1. It was just voted the 7th best place in the whole of the world to come and study video games. But we've got Napier in Edinburgh, Glasgow Cali, and the University of the West of Scotland out in the West Coast, University of the Highlands Islands, Heriot-Watt, Glasgow School of Art, you name it. In addition, they're being fed by 11 colleges across the country who are offering games design development at HNC and HND level. We have 2 innovation centres, one here in Dundee, which is in-game and creative informatics down in Edinburgh, both of which are supporting video games in its broadest definition. And outside the actual making games, we have so many students doing very clever, very innovative, and very sort of pioneering work when it comes to the idea of game studies, which is looking at games in a sociological or creative or cultural or heritage context. We've got it going on. Video games is still an incredible place to be, and Scotland is the place to be doing it in. And when it comes to the industry itself, according to my last count, we've got 317 active games companies, albeit a lot of those are now part-time side hustles, one-man bands, because so many people are now going, well, actually, I quite fancy the salary from JP Morgan, but I still want to express myself creatively. So 125 of these are potential employers, 74 supporting companies doing audio, marketing, animation, visual effects, post-production, you name it. All of the companies that ScreenSkills is here tonight to sort of represent and big up. 34 different tech companies. Because if you work in games, it doesn't have to be making video games. You can now make the technology to make video games, or you can use the technology from video games to go and do something else. If you've ever come across Axis Animation in Glasgow, they are another major employer. They're about the same size as Rockstar in terms of the sheer number of staff. Their fastest growing team is the real-time team, who use the Unreal Engine, a games platform, to go and do animation. And thanks to COVID, more and more of the screen sector is now relying on virtual production, which is, again, built upon games technology to make it happen. And we've got a very small number of freelancers for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why, given their prevalence in film and screen and the rest of the creative industries. However, again, there's a wide and varied and really kind of thriving ecosystem out there. And it's not just about Dundee. So many people sort of still think that Dundee is the beating heart, and it's still very important. It's where games began in Scotland, but it's spreading rapidly. Thanks to COVID, it's been accelerated, thanks to remote working, but also thanks to the fact that more and more people around the country are realizing they can do this, they can make this, they can create their own content, they can get it out there. And you do not have to be based in the Central Belt or in a major city. We've got a really lovely, interesting little cluster, mini cluster happening in Elgin, in Murrayshire, of all places. We've got about 6 little games companies that have sprung out of one larger studio. And this is spreading across the country. We've now got companies across the whole of the north that is. We've got companies emerging down in the borders, out into the Western Peninsulas and into the islands themselves. It's an incredible testament to the freeing, potential of technology. And as of 2020, the value of the games industry to Scotland's economy is 131 million gross value add. So this is a proper grown-up industry. We might quite like blowing stuff up, but virtually, obviously, you can absolutely see that this has immense economic value to Scotland as a country. And we have got so much more that we can be doing. I don't think we have come anywhere close to realising our full potential yet. £133 million in Scotland, £177 million in Denmark, Sweden, obviously twice our size in terms of population, 3.8 billion. But the kicker is Finland, thanks primarily to Nokia back in the 1990s. Their games industry is worth 2.4 billion pounds. It's phenomenal, and the industry is still growing. Thanks to COVID, everybody discovered they can play games, they can enjoy games without being a gamer. You can be a gamer now and never buy an Xbox, never pick up a controller. It's my mum discovered a love of Words with Friends. I'm convinced she's cheating. And I just introduced her at the weekend to Wordle. She now hates me, but my dad's very happy because he can watch the football in peace. So where are we right now? We're still in an era where a lot of games are still being played on the high-end devices, dedicated consoles. You've got your Xbox, your PlayStation, your Switch. But games are no longer just video games. We now have album launches and virtual concerts taking place in Fortnite. We've got mobile games like Genshin Impact generating revenues that exceed the GDP of some countries. And we've got games which are not games that appeal to parents and grandparents and doctors and dentists and people who think games are a waste of time. But Wordle's different. It's not a game, it's educational. But the point is that games are now ubiquitous. They're absolutely everywhere. Anything with a screen and processing power is capable of playing a game. And we are not even close to having all the gamers on planet Earth yet. There are easily another billion gamers that we can attract in to play games. And they're not going to be coming to the Xbox or the PlayStation. They're going to be coming in via mobile. They're going to be playing games like Wordle. They're going to be looking for experiences that are digital and interactive and fit into their other interests. They're going to be encountering and experiencing these things in museums and galleries and installations. They're going to be potentially finding new and immersive experiences within cinemas or new cinematic experiences. But more and more of the games that are succeeding out there are hyper casual. They're games created as disposable. They're games for non-gamers. And this is an entirely new art form, an entirely new way of thinking about games. And these are essentially single mechanic experiences that so many of the students going through our talent pipeline have probably got sitting in their GitHub repository as a little idea. And if you can turn it into a finished product, you can make money with it. You can attract players. You can get your career underway. And the one constant in video games is change, right? It's a digital-based industry. It has been from the outset. And technology is constantly moving forward. We haven't got to the end of technology yet. We may never get to the end of technology yet. But we're already seeing a lot of new technologies, devices, and enabling technologies coming through. Immersive technology like virtual, augmented, and mixed reality. We've got the metaverse and the tools to create your own environment, interlinked environment within an online world. We've got cloud gaming. Did you know that we're facing a future where you may never have to install another game, whether it's on your mobile, your console, your PC, because your game can be streamed to your device, the same way that Spotify streams music or YouTube streams video. We've got the Internet of Things and multi-platform gaming. Dundee is one of the test beds in the UK for 5G technology and the Internet of Things and all the enablement that's going to bring. We've not even started to plumb the opportunities that these new devices and these enabling technologies bring to the world of games. But it's going to be fun finding out. And this is where games have value. This is where people with the capability of making games and producing interactive content can really have a major impact on Scotland's future as a digital society. The problem is, we still think of games as somehow being inherently, culturally worthless. It's their digital toys. It's stuff for kids, right? There's a reason that Dundee was allowed to grow its own industry. If people had taken it seriously, it would have been dragged kicking and screaming to Edinburgh or Glasgow, more likely to London. But like the Beano and the Dandy, it's for kids. Nobody has to take it seriously. But if we continue to think of games as just this artifact that's suitable for 18 to 35-year-old people and is a complete waste of time, we're going to miss all of the opportunities that we're facing. We need to go beyond the idea of games as a pastime, as an entertainment mechanism. The truth is that games are transformative technology. The tools, the platforms, the technologies that are now being used have been created in games or to build new video games are having an ever greater impact on our creative world. Right? If any of you have watched anything on Disney+, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, The Mandalorian, Star Wars, the chances are a big chunk of whatever it was you were watching was created using a game's technology. Right? There's a reason that ScreenSkills are here representing film and animation and visual effects and games. The old definitions, the old boundaries, compartmentalization between them all are getting less and less relevant. And The Mandalorian is a deep, deep joy. I would recommend anybody who has even the remotest interest in the digital future, go and track down some of the making of videos on YouTube or on Disney+. You see Jon Favreau, the director, in a VR headset with two handsets, and he's got one guy dressed as a stormtrooper in front of him, and he's going, no, I'm not happy. We'll take him out. We'll put another one in there, change the backdrop. No, now we're in the Death Star. But none of it's real. It's just on the big screens in front of him. It's madness, but it's all being done now with video games technology. And despite the fact that the game sector is engaged in this strange race to the bottom with more and more content in the market and more of it being offered for free, we're still growing. The commercial juggernaut that is games is still growing, despite the fact that more and more of the games are being given away for nothing, in some cases. And we have not even begun to scratch the surface of how games can be utilized in the classroom. Right? You can have kids who get 45 minutes on an iPad to engage with something in an educational context, and then they'll go home and spend 4 hours playing Minecraft or Fortnite. We can do this. Epic, who make Fortnite, have an office here in Scotland. Unity have an office here in Scotland. 4J Studios make Minecraft here in Scotland, here in Dundee. There's so much that we could be doing. I shouldn't shake the phone. I now have to undo my typing. But we have to be able to plug this in. We have to be able to plug games into the wider digital technology, the Scottish Tech Ecosystem Review, and everything that's going on. And we've got such great examples. Mal mentioned so many of the things that Biome are doing, and they are absolutely wonderful. We've got a Game Doctor in Glasgow who got a £50,000 knowledge transfer network grant to go and make a game about vaccines to reassure people around the world that vaccination is not a sinister conspiracy. And it's being done. We used to think that video games were going to isolate us. We would all live in a virtual world, the metaverse would come along, society would collapse, and we'd all die of malnutrition. That's not actually the case. I would contend that our lives are becoming more game-like. More and more of our daily activities are becoming digitized. The data that we generate is being gathered and utilized in ways which thrill and delight and engage with us. Again, look at your fitness tracker. Look at the number of times you've gone for a walk and gone, I didn't switch the pedometer on, it doesn't count. Your store cards are working towards this game apocalypse. And the idea of data sharing and social media and all of the things that you can do with your friends online are becoming more and more game-like. And this is touching every other element of our digital futures. We can't let the games ecosystem in Scotland continue along just, it's merely being looked upon as a weird artifact by the rest of Scotland. We cannot have it seen as, it's fine, we know it makes money, but it's not a proper career. It's absolute nonsense. Video games have a huge amount to offer. They've got a massive part to play in our role as a digital society moving forward. But there's more to games than just the industry. We've got academia, we've got education, we've got healthcare, we've got the opportunity to get this into GovTech and CivTech and the public sector in so many different ways. And if we can do that, we can be one of the first countries in the world to make video games a vital part of our digital future. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Brian, for making that look very, very easy. And now for something completely different. Elena is the founder of a small little independent game studio in Edinburgh, making a wonderful little game called Wholesome Out and About. To talk to you a little bit more about what it's like to run a small independent game studio, and hopefully kind of, I'll just hand it over to you, Elena. Thanks so much. Cheers, Elena.
Cheers. Well, it's tough. It's tough to follow Brian and Mal. So I try to do my best to explain what I've been doing and how I've ended up at this point, because I think I can explain a little bit more from the student perspective and like how my journey has been to arrive to this point and where I want to head in the future. So yeah, as I said, my name is Elena. I founded Dundee Games. We exist since 2020, so I started the game studios essentially during the pandemic. And since then we've won a couple of awards and competitions. So we're part of the Converge Creative Challenge. We won the Young Innovator Award, the Social Shifters Global Innovation Challenge. We won an investment from the Edinburgh Tech Fund, and then the UK Games Fund and the Innovate UK Follow-on Fund. So it's just there's actually been a lot of support from the UK and the Scottish ecosystem for my business. And that has been in part because of the game that I'm developing is very much leaning towards a really nice combination of have like a game, but also something meaningful and educational. So what I'm developing is, I call it Wholesome Out and About, because I wanted to be physically and mentally good for people when they play it. And the idea is that in Wholesome, you can explore an open world, like a very beautiful nature environment. You learn about real plants and mushrooms. You learn to identify them because the characteristics are the same as the real plants. Then you can take them home. You have to sort them in good or bad box. You know, do you want to keep it? Should you compost it? Is this edible? And then you can make recipes, and those are real as well. So we can integrate real life knowledge into this game. And when kids and adults as well are playing it, they essentially learn about nature, they learn about plants and mushrooms, they connect to nature through playing the game, and then get inspired to go outside and do something maybe with their families, maybe recreate some of those recipes, make a strawberry jam, make a nettle syrup, and also learn how to cook and live healthy. And the same goes for crafting, because there's a lot of really fun hobbies out there, like crocheting, knitting, and tinkering with all kinds of like felting, and that's what Etsy is made up of. Like Etsy has like 4 million sellers at this point and 8 million I think buyers, and it's just about people who have a hobby putting what they have out there. And so that's kind of what I'm doing with my game, is integrating this real life information into something that is far more digestible and far more fun to do, rather than just reading a cookbook or reading a foraging guide or reading a kind of crafting instruction, because you can make it inside the game, you can be exposed to it, and then you can be motivated to do it in real life. And that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm using the good that games can do, the power of motivation, to inspire people to do something healthier. And yes, so until this point, so my journey has essentially been that I started business computing. So I had a bit of business and like IT and knowledge, essentially, because I thought, this is what I need to start this company, because I've had my mind set up on that pretty early when I was still in school. And originally was from Germany. And I called my studio Yali because I heard that word as like a Glaswegian slang for yay and like excitement. And I thought it was just really adorable and like a sort of tribute to Scotland in that sense. And so yeah, ever since starting the company, what I've been doing is, of course, focusing largely on business development and managing my team and getting more funding and doing the game design. So these are all these different. There are so many different roles in games. I think that's the most important thing. I hired two programmers who actually I think they came from universities in Scotland, and then I have two artists and then a tech designer now. So we're currently a team of 6, and I think the great thing about games really is that it brings people from all sorts of industries together. You have so much creativity. You have people who can draw really well, so the 2D artists, and you have the 3D artists who can model something in 3D. Even there, you have so many subcategories. People who focus on characters and environments, and then there's music, there's sound, and then there's all the different kinds of programming. And the game design is like a whole thing, like coming up with a set of rules, and that kind of thinking. And then you've got marketing and accounting, and everything comes together in games. So it's highly technical, and it's also highly creative, and that's just kind of the beauty of it. Because what I've been seeing a lot from the industry right now is the people who are now veterans. They came from the most like weirdest backgrounds, maybe being like a physicist or something, or a physiotherapist or something. Like they actually made it into the games industry, and now that we're actually got a few more games-related courses, which even when I studied wasn't the case. A lot of the courses that I could have studied in my bachelor for game design would have been programming, which is not my talent. So now we've got this opportunity of people actually learning more about games and having these specific courses in university, maybe already in school. I mean, that's actually amazing. I think the UK is far ahead of Germany, for example, in terms of how much you learn about IT and technology in school already, and how much you use like technology in school. Like, we've been doing some work for Sumdog. They have the maths game for schools, and I've been doing some work for them as well, going into classes, talking to students back then, and that's amazing. It really helps kids learn about maths, and it motivates them to do that. So I feel like games really have so much potential to do good, and there are so many different ways people can contribute to that, contribute their own skills and talents to make it happen. And that's essentially so what I did. It's like my strengths are in creating a business and doing game design, and then I started the company, and I've been busy ever since, to say the least. But when I'm looking at people now, and I'm in the position where I need to hire people, then the most important thing for the games industry, anyone can offer me, for example, as an employer, is to create their portfolio, to look at having this sort of self-motivation to create something maybe in their own time, in their own free time, or for university courses, or maybe even in school already, to create even the simplest things, like in games or board games, or anything that can show off some of that skill. And I think really, if people were looking to get into the games industry, or looking to learn more about how to teach people to get into the games industry, it's really all about creating the room for having more of these smaller projects and game jams, and bringing people together to experiment and create small projects that can be done maybe in a weekend, because that really creates that experience that people are looking for when they're hiring people, and also just is a lot of fun. So maybe I don't know if you have some questions that are like specifically about my educational journey or anything like that, where I can create a little bit more specific value. Okay, well, so I think I'm kind of running out of things to say. But yeah, so I think then I'll stop it here. So, okay, cool.
And again. Sorry, those who are watching online, if they've got headphones in, that would have been really rough. Thank you so much, Elena. That was absolutely wonderful. Now for the other end of the spectrum. Elena comes from a really small independent game studio. Carol here comes from a Dundee-based studio called Tag Games and is the COO there. They are how many staff now, Carol? 66 odd staff. So one of the biggest employers in the games employers in the city, to talk to you a little bit about, well, you may be wondering, games sound pretty cool, but how the hell does anyone actually make them? Carol.
This is a snapshot of maybe 16 years of my life. Some of the titles that I have worked on over the years. I'll come back to those in a second, but just to touch on something you said, Mal, actually. I wasn't going to talk about this, but I also was terrible at school. Like, I really struggled in that kind of academic environment. Like, just never sat down and paid attention. My teachers probably hated me and would be very surprised to see me standing up here just now with the sort of job title that I have. And that is not to legitimise messing about at school. Any younger people listening, but ended up at uni, and actually, to Elena's point, I also did kind of computing. So I came in through a fairly, in some senses, non-traditional route actually to the industry, and I consider myself to be an accidental game developer because I didn't plan this. And to touch on something Brian talked about. The Lemmings documentary that he referenced in his talk, Brian and I actually went to watch together delightfully in December in DCA. And it had never occurred to me, actually. I don't know if I said this to you. Anyway, that game my dad bought for my brother and I for the Super Nintendo, for those that remember that console, when I was, in my early teens. And it kind of blew my mind in December when we watched the documentary about the game, to realise that 12, 13-year-old me playing that game all those years ago ended up with the career that I've got today and the very specific job that I've got today because of those guys in that game. Like, you can actually, if we plotted my career back in enough detail, you could go back to that game, because obviously that was DMA. Brian and your cronies led to things that came later, which then led to actually this studio, Real Time Worlds, in this game APB, which we worked on round about sort of 2007 to 2010. So, very strange journey is the point. So anyway, I've been around for a little while. I've worked on PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, worked for what must still be the biggest studio that ever has been in Dundee, right? Real Time Worlds, on APB down in the bottom left corner. Hopped over to Microsoft, worked on one of the last first-party titles for Xbox 360, and then I had the great privilege, actually. And again, if you told like teenage me that I would end up doing this, I would never have believed this to be true. But I worked on the launch team for the original Xbox One. The work that my team did on that actually got patent for Microsoft, and that game got a BAFTA. So a very legitimate career, it turns out. Like, who knew? I wouldn't have imagined that, like, genuinely, as a younger person, and my stepmom certainly wouldn't have done. She's kind of eating her words now. And then more recently, kind of came back to Dundee. I'd been away for a long time, came back to work for Outplay, who are in the Vision building next to Tag, on some mobile titles. And I can't tell you anything about what Tag's doing just now, actually, so I just have to point to this, which I think was probably the last thing we were credited on, but CSR2 for Natural Motion and Dinga. So this is a little bit of what I have done. So I was asked to talk today about how we actually make games. So I'm going to try and do that in 10 minutes, which turns out is quite difficult when I was trying to figure out how to condense it. So I'm going to fly through this. And I will say as well, different studios, different companies use the same words slightly differently, but broadly speaking, this is kind of how certainly for bigger titles, like the ones that I have worked on, we would kind of break down the projects. So you got the kind of the 4 phases. You've got concept, you've got pre-production, you've got production and post-production, which again other industries use as well, although perhaps slightly differently in some senses. Concept. So if I was to distill this phase into a nutshell, it's really about defining what the game is, what's the product, right? And so some of the typical questions, not all of them, but some of the typical questions we might be trying to answer, regardless of the size of the game, right? So you've heard from, you know, Elena and Mal, who've worked on great titles, but quite small, I imagine. Kind of the teams were probably kind of
2 to 6 maximum.
Right. Whereas some of the projects that I've just referred to, like you're talking about hundreds of people and actually thousands on the Xbox One launch. But regardless of the size of the game, and regardless as well of whether the origin of the game is commercial, by which it's Microsoft wanting to, you know, create a game that's targeting a particular demographic because we know that that demographic has a lot of money to spend, or whether it's Mal and his team who've got a really, or Elena has a really cool, very creatively driven idea for something. You know, in Elena's case, which is clearly, you know, she's talking about being wholesome. So it's, you know, there's something very ethical and very wholesome about that. Regardless of the origins, ultimately you're trying to answer the same questions in the initial phases. So it's like, what's the core player experience? Is it an exploration game where you're kind of wandering about the environment, inspecting the flora and fauna, or is it a driving game? And if it's a driving game, is it Mario Kart, so it's very cartoony and you know the comic mischief with the banana skins and the green shells, or is it Grand Theft Auto, so quite realistic, very gritty, very adult in some of its theming? And who's the player, right? Who are we making this game for? Almost every game now, and certainly the bigger commercial ones, spend a lot of time and resource on figuring out who the core demographics are, because that's truthfully how you make your money, is by being very selective about identifying a segment of the population, the game playing population, or in some cases actually the non-typical game playing population, and figuring out how you actually target them. How do we do that? Well, part of that actually is through art style, right? Different art styles, different visual styles actually appeal more or less to very specific demographics. I'm going to be horribly stereotypical and ask, does anyone here play Candy Crush or games like that? That's interesting, that's not the answer I was expecting. So those very cute cartoony games tend to appeal more to women, right? And women of a certain age as well, of which I am one. Whereas the grittier, hyper-realistic games tend to appeal more to younger men. And then there's a spectrum in between those, right? So art style is not accidental. And actually the game that we're working on just now, we've just done a ton of tests on slightly different art styles because one of the segments that we're targeting is in a specific geographic area who have very specific preferences when it comes to art style. So already, just with these 3 questions, we're talking about player experience, we're talking about segmenting player demographics of players and determining art style. So straight away, you've got concept artists involved in that, 2D and 3D concept artists, right? So they're creating lovely bits of artwork where they're actually creating models and texturing them and creating 3D scenes that we send off to be tested, or we actually put in front of groups like this and ask them how they are responding. Likely they are to play a game that looks like this, which means we need market researchers. When we're talking about player segmentation, you've got data scientists, you've got other researchers, you've got actual scientists who understand how to conduct surveys and mine data, all of which gets presented back to teams like ours in order to make decisions about the games. And in terms of the core player experience, you've got design teams, and Elena touched on this as well. You've got lots of sub-disciplines within design, all working together. A game designer is not one job. You have narrative designers, you have technical designers, you have mission and quest designers, you have systems designers, you have feature designers. So you have the major disciplines, which I'll come back to in a second, but you also have a huge array of sub-disciplines underneath. But even at the very beginning, as you're trying to decide what it is that you're making, the number of different people that have to come together and work together to help you make good decisions is actually staggering. And I haven't even mentioned producers. Production's my background. I tend to always prioritise production when I talk. And producers are just the glue that bring everything together. They're project managers, by any other name. They're often more than that, but at their core, they're project managers. What technology will we use? So as someone mentioned Unreal. Unreal is an engine that we use, well, we're not, but a lot of people use to make games. Unity is another one. Unity have an office in Dundee. It's a very important choice, actually, one, because the kind of game that you're making often helps you choose which engine, because certain engines are better at some things than others. Also, actually has a huge impact on hiring, because depending on where you are geographically, if you've picked a particular technology and you need 30 software engineers, ideally you want software engineers that have some sort of understanding of that engine. So every choice that you make influences everything else that's happening with your game, and influences other parts of the business. And Elena touched on this as well. Like, game studios are businesses like any other. I'm COO now, so I literally cover everything: HR, IT, finance, plumbing, like all of the things that any normal business has to make happen. Payroll, we have to do too. So there are huge numbers of people in studios that go unnoticed, who are making sure that hoodie orders go in, and everyone gets the size of hoodie that they want, and that the plumbers come in and fix the pipe, and vision building, turn on the heating or whatever. And what platforms are we targeting for launch? I have worked across console and mobile, and again, you may well choose the platforms that you're targeting based on the type of game that you're making, or it might be the other way around. It might be a project that starts out, from a really creatively driven place, like GTA and Lemmings, right? They will have been, I imagine, I've never asked, but like GTA and APB must have been the games that you guys wanted to play, right? Okay, we'll talk about that another day. Yes.
Exactly.
And it was simpler in those days, but the kind of platform that you're targeting influences the kind of game that you're making, and vice versa. And also, the more platforms you're targeting, the bigger potentially your team has to be, and the more specialisms that you require in order to support those platforms. And this is just this is a fraction of what we actually have to figure out in the concept phase, but these are kind of some of the bigger ones. So again, you have engineering, you have data science in there, you have marketing people, you might even actually have real players, imagine that you're talking to. So once you know what you're trying to make, whether that is Candy Crush or whether that is Mario Kart or whatever, the pre-production phase is very much about de-risking. It's very much about, I was talking to someone about this yesterday actually, getting ready to be ready to make the game. Particularly for bigger games, they are big beasts, they are creatively complex, they can be technically very complex, they can be logistically complex, because you've got different technologies that you're using, you have lots of creative decisions that need to be made, and you often have very, very big teams that you're trying to bring together to make the game. The team that I'm managing at the minute has people across 4 different time zones, stretching from the west coast of America to Shanghai, and we're into the triple digits, sort of low to mid triple digits. So the logistical challenge there is insane, and there's multiple companies involved as well, so you've got the cultural aspects to that. But anyway, it's about putting the machine, it's about starting to think about how you build the machine to build the game, is how I often talk about it. So what kind of things are we doing in this phase? Well, we're starting to do a much deeper dive on the business case for the game. What's the commercial reality of this title? If it's something kind of at the scale that I tend to work at, I think possibly slightly different for some of the others that you've heard from, although they will have similar challenges to navigate. Crucially, I don't know why I didn't put this first, because I should have done, but finding the fun is really quite important. And it sounds straightforward, right? But fun is not a thing that you can write down. Like, and it's the oddest thing, because until you've made a game, you're like, well, of course it is. But you can have the very best creative team and amazing ideas, and then you start prototyping on mobiles or, you know, on PC or whatever, and you start playing little boxy prototypes. And it's really amazing how often a thing that you thought would be fun when you were all standing about in the kitchen or in front of a whiteboard talking about it turns out not to be. But a really random thing that a programmer does because he's bored one day ends up being the thing that has everyone standing round his computer. But finding the fun is so important, because ultimately what we're talking about there, as we extrapolate that out, is like that's the thing that people are going to, one, get excited about, two, invest their time in, and three, frankly, more importantly, sometimes to some of the people that I work for, spend their money on, right? What is it about this game that makes me or my nephew or Brian or any of you choose this game over that game? And it's part science, and we use a lot of science, right? We use things like user testing, user research, and data science. But actually, there's an art to it as well. And when you see really amazing creative teams, creative directors, designers, you know, and actually all the disciplines, it's not just designers that design games, right? One of the interesting things about managing game teams is almost everyone is actually really creative, even the people that don't think they are. So everyone kind of piles in, but finding the fun, super, super important part of pre-production. And then proving out the processes and pipelines. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, for example, making sure that your art team, who are over there creating tons of really lovely artwork, whether it's 2D or 3D, have the ability to take the assets that they're creating and hand them over to the software teams for implementation in game. And actually, ideally, what you want is that they don't even have to do that. There's an automation in place so that the artists can create their lovely artwork, and it passes through into the game logic so that when the player picks up their device or their controller, they can control their character, right? So when I move the joystick and controller, my character moves like this. You want as much of that to be automated as possible. And processes, other processes include like design documentation. You know, we have a design team of more than 20 people. So that's a lot of designers creating a lot of design, right? We need documentation structures for that. We have a rather large but not big enough production team, bless them, trying to manage this project. So the project management methodology and so on and so forth, really important. And a large part of my background is in that kind of area, making sure that that is all in place so that as you scale, and I'll come to that in a second, as you apply more people to the team, the core processes are already in place so that you're not just adding more people and creating more chaos. There have to be some rules in place in order for everything to work smoothly, because you have so many disciplines coming together, building something that ultimately has to come together. Identifying the team that we need. So through concept and pre-production, ideally you want the team to be really quite small, because at the kind of ideation and conceptualization phase, you don't necessarily have an awful lot of actual work to do when you're defining the idea. But through pre-production, you're starting to understand. So if it was Mario Kart, for example, I'm assuming people know what Mario Kart is actually. Do we all know roughly? Yeah, right. I love that as an example because I get to talk about banana skins. Like with Mario Kart, there's a very big difference between me coming along as one of the EPs at Nintendo and saying the next version of Mario Kart is going to have 4 tracks and 4 special items versus the next version of Mario Kart is going to have 64 tracks and 128 items. The size of team you're going to need is going to differ significantly depending on the scale of the game that you're trying to create. right? Not necessarily in a linear fashion, but you get the point. You need to understand how many people you need and of what specialisms. And a lot of the specialisms that you need as you start to actually build it out are not the ones that you need early on. You add to it. But you need to understand what it is that you need so you can plan for it. And then just having a feature roadmap and schedule in place. So really just kind of putting your plan together, right? Being really clear about what's the core thing that we're going to build. We understand why it's fun. We understand who we're building it for and what the commercial case for it is. We have at least the beginnings of the machine in place so that we can take a thing and pass it into the game. And we have a plan. We know how many people we need to hire. We know when we need to hire them, and we know what work they will be doing at whatever point in time. So moving into production, this is the point in time, in theory, I don't think I've ever seen it happen like this, where you've de-risked not quite everything, but so here is all about answering questions. There are more questions than answers right up until the very end, right? And that's normal. And we always forget it's normal, or certainly the teams that I've worked with have. By the time you get here, I'm not going to say you've answered every question because you haven't, because a ton more come up every day, but the size and scale of them starts to kind of reduce as time goes on. But what you are doing, to my previous point, is you're ramping up the team. Because you know now, for example, we know how to build tracks for Mario Kart, and we've got lovely tools in place that allow us to create the tracks and all the special things that happen on the tracks and all the tricky things, and place enemies at the side of the tracks, piranha plants coming in and grabbing you as you're driving past. The kind of bare bones are in place. We know how to build it. It's maybe not been built in final code. It maybe doesn't look very pretty, right? But we've proven out the concepts, which allows you to scale out the team, because now you know we've tested one track and a couple of cars. Now we need to make another 120 cars. You just, she says flippantly, throw a ton of artists at that challenge, or you outsource it. And you start building the cars. And you know what the art style is, so you can let the art team go away to their heart's content and create all the different styles of vehicles. And the design team have designed all the special abilities that the vehicles have, and all the special items are all lovely. You know, they're documented on Confluence somewhere. And I'm sure the documentation is always up to date. So you're building up, you're starting to scale. You're proving the experience end to end. So in pre-production, you probably left pre-production with a ton of prototypes. So little bits of playable software or other types of prototypes. Sometimes you prototype on paper or like diagrams on the wall. Like prototype isn't always software, like proof of concept of some sort, because that's how we de-risk, that's how we answer questions. And the more visually, or the more, what's the word? Like haptically, is that a word? Haptically, we do that. The easier it is, if you think about teams bigger than this, trying to get everyone on the same page and keep them on the same page is honestly impossible through words, and definitely through documents. But if I can show you, right, it makes it much easier for me to bring you on the journey as a creative director or something like that. But proving the experience end to end. So what I mean by that is not just having all the little prototypes, but actually having a fully kind of, you know, you might call it a vertical slice or a first playable build. There's lots of different approaches to this, but kind of defining, okay, we're going to have 3 tracks that have all the final twists and turns, and, you know, driving physics is in place and the items are there. And it's indicative of the final experience. And you've got the menu screens that are coming up. The UI UX team have been really busy, so you've got menus that show you you've placed number 1 and Carol's won over Brian, so you can see the little like teasing animation that Carol's character gets to do because I won and you didn't. And you're welcome. And the audio's in place, so you've got the taunts and the music, you know, the celebration music's in there. So you don't have the full game, right? But you have a build that you can deliver, and again, get your execs, get your stakeholders, get your team, because we always forget about that. We're really on board with understanding what it is that we're trying to deliver. Getting into a regular rhythm of development. In pre-production, everything's a bit stop-starty because you're still trying to answer questions, right? The train tracks, it's one of my favourite analogies or metaphors. The other one being sausage making machine, but I'll come back to that in a sec. Like, the most efficient way to operate teams at the kind of scale we work with is to get into a rhythm so that everyone has just enough work coming in. You're not planning too far ahead because that makes you inflexible, right? Because, as I said earlier, sometimes finding the fun, it takes iteration. There's a bit of feel to that. So it means you produce a build, everyone gets around it and plays it, critiques it, we take the feedback, and then we change our plan going forward based on how the game is actually starting to develop. But when you're operating teams at the kind of scale I'm talking about, the efficiency only comes when everyone starts to kind of get into that regular rhythm where the work is flowing, everyone knows what they're doing for the next little while, and production are kind of feeding that in. And you can do the reporting and tracking and kind of tell where you are in terms of the project, just core project management stuff, which allows you to monitor progress and adjust your plans. Clearly, certainly in the world that I operate in, there are people, companies in America spending an awful lot of money on what we're doing, right? So quite rightly, there has to be a level of rigor and control around that. Are we on track or are we not? Are we on budget? Are we not? It's very important. And then down at the bottom, like validating the product, validating the game, like all the way through production, you are constantly asking yourselves, or you should be, like, are we doing the right things? Is the game going in the direction that we want? Are we still making the game that we set out to? And it sounds like a really odd thing, but we've gone through this just recently, actually. Like, we've been working on something for 18 months. And the thing that we said we were making is quite different to the thing that we actually have, is on my phone in my pocket right now. Not bad, not wrong, it just evolved, right? Because as we learned more, we changed, we evolved our thinking. But you still have to validate that actually you're making something that fulfills the goals that you set out to. And if you're a little 2-3 person band and all you're really trying to do is surprise and delight people, then that's one thing. If you're like us and you're actually obviously wanting to surprise and delight players, but also create something commercially very successful, there's some other criteria that you have to hit as well. So these are the kind of things that we're thinking about. But there's more certainty in this world, in theory. And then I'll speed up because I think I'm probably running over. Post-production. So this is where it gets a little bit interesting, because post-production can mean different things to different people. But in essence, if we're talking about console, we're talking about Goldmaster candidates. So that's getting to a version of the code. Everything has come together. We've got a version of the game we all feel really good about. It's approved for release. You send it off to some factory and actual physical discs get printed, which hasn't happened to me for a very long time. More often, and certainly in my world, for devices, what we're looking at are soft launches. So what we do is we test products in territories that are not the kind of territories that are likely to make us a lot of money for our games, but still have segments of players that we can test with. So the Philippines is often quite popular because the cost of acquiring users there is generally quite low. So what you do is you would launch your game in the App Store in the Philippines, for example, and then your data teams, your analysts, tons of analytics in games. I didn't really talk about that, actually, I should have done. Tons of analytics. So collecting thousands and thousands of data points from everything that you do in a session in a game. It gets sent back to a data center somewhere, and some very clever teams take that data, cube it, slice it, stick it in Tableau or Amplitude or something, and then deliver it to teams like ours, where we sit and get insights from the analysts that tell us how successful certain parts of the games are. So, for example, we know that players are really loving the green shell track in Mario Kart, but actually they're just not engaging with the mushroom track. And oh my goodness, they will spend so much money on new dungarees for Mario, but they will not spend any money on a crown for Princess, right? And then you start to see how that feeds into the product team. So the product managers work very closely with the data teams, who work very closely with the designers, making decisions about the games that you're playing. And then clearly in the world that we're living in now, it's not like that screenshot that you had of the wee guy playing his Nintendo, right? Completely disconnected from any sort of network, because networks weren't really a thing. Every one of these is online constantly. So, you know, mobile games and even most console games now, you're not done making the game once the disc has been pressed. Like, I'm old enough to remember that. And it's bizarre now to think of, actually. You launch the game online, so, you know, Candy Crush is a great example. New levels coming out every week, right? New boosters or whatever coming out every week. New content constantly being generated for other games. So I've kind of rediscovered Hitman for the PS4 lately. And, you know, they're constantly pushing out DLC, so new levels and things are coming out. So that's like huge bits of content, right? So you're actually going right back into the development cycle for that DLC. But your live ops teams, they exist solely to extend the tail of the game and extend the life of the game. And then marketing and player support. So huge teams that do things like marketing, so traditional marketing. So, you know, publicizing the game in whatever form of media is most appropriate for the demographic that matches the game that you have made, right? The places that you advertise your game are going to change depending on what game you've made, and your marketing teams will understand that. User acquisition is a huge part of what we do now. Hugely specialized teams that understand far better than I do how to actually go out and acquire users that come into our games and spend money in our games. And player support. We've got, you know, however hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of people playing our games. You know, depending on the success of your game, imagine the volume of player support calls coming in. You have teams looking after them, community teams as well, in forums and things like that. So again, you know, we have data science, we have producers planning, we have marketers and community and player support people. Data science is all through this. You've got not only the kind of the software engineering teams building the game code itself, you've got teams and teams of people managing the infrastructure and data centers, whether it's hosted by Amazon or whether it's hosted by, you know, Azure. Like, all of these people looking after the infrastructure that keeps games like, you know, Hitman or Candy Crush running minute after minute, hour after hour. You know, my nephew was enraged last weekend because Epic went down, Fortnite went down because I think they did a season update. And he couldn't get in for like 2 hours and it was like the end of the world, you know, but there will have been teams of people up to all sorts getting the game back up and running. As well as the content creators, of course. And the end, except it isn't really, because it just goes round in a big circle and hits that. So I think I've said enough.
Thank you, Carol. We're kind of running over a time for a little bit, so I might have to skip the Q&A. So I just mind if we could just give another round of applause to all the people that have spoken tonight, just for taking their time to join us this evening. I very quickly am going to present a little bit about the work we do at Into Games, and answering a question that's often on lots of people's minds is how do I get work experience in the games industry? As you may have known already, I'm Brandon. We work at Into Games. You may know us from titles such as Into Games, the video game, and Into Games 2, Electric Boogaloo. In all seriousness, we're a non-profit that operate across the UK to basically make a rewarding career in games more accessible, more inclusive, more open, easier for people to kind of, you know, find that dream role in the games industry. Hence why we put this event on tonight. And as I said, I'm here to kind of answer the question. You can move up 1 second. Answer the question, how do you get work experience in the games industry? The short answer is you can't really. It's really, really hard for young people to get work experience in the games industry for many, many reasons. Typically, it's really hard to get work directly in studios. Pandemic's made that much more difficult. A lot of studios are under strict non-disclosure agreements. It's really difficult for them to bring young people into the office. They work on really dynamic projects. that are changing all the time. So it can make it really difficult to find short amounts of work for young people to do over a week or over 2 weeks. So yes, the truth is it's very hard, but hopefully we can give some alternatives, some advice that you can give to young people when they come to you and say, I want to work in the games industry. How do I get work experience or some kind of relevant experience in games? The first one, and I would ask people to do, is a lot of the time young people will say, I want to work in games. And then your question to them should be, what role do you want to do? And if they can't give you an answer, they should go to intogames.org/careers and they should look up the 150 plus roles that exist in the UK games industry and find one that they're passionate about, that they're interested in. No one's asking them to have a massive career journey planned out. You'll miss out on a ton of opportunities if you do that, but find something that gets you excited. Go on the Into Games Careers website, look at production, programming, audio, marketing, legal, accounting, finance, design, art. There's so many roles and disciplines out there, and young people, if they want to work in games, should have some idea about what it is that they actually want to do in the games industry. So number one, get clear on a pathway or a role that you want to do. Second is seek out some kind of self-guided or virtual work experience. There's a ton of resources online. It's not like back in the day when if you wanted to make games, you had to know somebody who worked at the Timex factory in Dundee who knew how the console was programmed so that you could join a coding club and they would show you how the games were made. It's super easy to find stuff out there now on how to make games, and there's a ton of resources online that you can access. So there's an amazing EA one that's all about being a software engineer in the games industry that they've made, and it talks young people through the process of making games and being a software engineer in the games industry. Atom Hawk have an amazing one called Studio Quest that talks you through the process of being a studio-based concept artist in the games industry. And we also run a week-long virtual work experience that pairs college students with studios local to them, where they basically get to experience what it's like to work in a studio-style environment, doing daily stand-ups, getting feedback from industry professionals, and pitching their game ideas back to the studio. And we also run an amazing free platform. If you guys haven't signed up before and you work with young people with education, we run a platform called the Video Games Ambassadors. Essentially, it's a free online platform that connects educators or organizations that work with young people to games industry volunteers. There's nearly 1,000 games industry professionals across the UK working in every discipline that you can imagine, volunteering their time to run workshops, give Q&As, careers talks, game jams. So if you ever run a careers day at your university or school or with whatever organization you support, you can go to Games Ambassadors, sign up for free, post an opportunity, and within hours, you'll find a games industry volunteer who's willing to come and talk about the work that they do in games and make that experience a little bit more real for a young person who might be passionate about potentially starting a career in games. The next one, build a portfolio of work. This is a great thing that you can get young people thinking about really early on that is super, super crucial to working in the games industry or landing your first job. Is building a portfolio of work. That is some place or space online where you showcase your best work to the world. Every single person who works in the games industry in any sort of role where they're creating things will have a portfolio of some kind, and it's what they do to present and showcase themselves as a professional. And it's very easy to get a young person to start creating their work. Have you got someone who's a young person who's an artist? Get them put their art up on ArtStation. It's a really good practice to get into, to start showcasing, sharing your work, getting it out there online, getting feedback from people, something hugely, hugely important. So get young people showcasing their work online and tell them to, find a brief on the Into Games Discord, which I'll talk about in a second, create a piece of work, showcase it online, get feedback from people. This is an industry practice. This is something that industry professionals do all the time. So it's a great way to get them thinking about a future career in some way. Next up, game jams. If anyone here not know what a game jam is? No, there's a few shaking heads. So game jams are basically game making competitions where people get a set amount of time, a brief, and they're basically told, here, go away and make a game set to this brief in this amount of time. Industry use them all the time as a great way for prototyping, for getting staff to work together and collaborate on new ideas. And anyone who wants to get into the games industry in a development role will need to do a game jam of some kind. It's a great way to get young people, anyone who's curious, thinking about game making, collaborating with other people, working to a brief and to a time limit. This is essentially, a shortened version of what studios are doing in the real world for creating games. And there's hundreds of them all over, all online that you can access really easily. So things like the Global Game Jam runs across the world. Tens of thousands of people take part in that every single year. And there's in-person hubs, even across Scotland, where people can get involved in them. There's great ones as well around social impact and social justice. So it's a really great way to get young people interested in kind of like topics that they're passionate about, whether that be kind of like climate action or LGBTQ+, or, you know, any sort of inclusivity or social impact thing. It's a great way to get young people excited about kind of building creative solutions to problems around the world. Next up is one that I just highly recommend telling to people is learn transferable skills in another job. Get young people excited about the job that they do and make them realize that they are learning really useful, valuable skills. When you speak to people who work in the games industry, a lot of the time, if you ask them what their path is, it's not something that you expect. It's not where you expect them to have come from or work that you'd expect them to have done before. And they will tell you that it's things that they learned in other jobs that led the way for them to work in games. So whether you're working in retail or hospitality or a desk job, working in a school, it doesn't really matter. There's all transferable skills. And the industry loves people who can demonstrate how they've used skills in other industries or sectors to kind of get them to where they are today and to say, look, I learned project management, or I learned conflict resolution, or I learned how to be a great communicator by the job that I did working for Sky Call Support as, you know, office or whatever. And there's a quote here that I really like from a community manager on our Discord. Community management is everything to do with listening to people, making them feel valued and acknowledged, and then it's down to creativity to keep them engaged and invested. There are so many jobs where you can learn those skills. You don't have to be a community manager in games to learn, you know, how to listen to people. So get young people excited about the work that they're doing and say, look, you don't have to work in games right away. It's a windy road into the industry. Make use of the opportunities that you have in front of you now, and work from there. And finally, as well, start making games now. If you're passionate about getting into the games industry and you're not exploring making games in some way, you're doing something wrong. And as I said before, in the same way with self-guided work experience, there's a ton of resources out there everywhere. You just need to look. Both on the IntoGames.org website, we have a free tools library that lists all of the things that you can create games or game-like experiences with. And funny thing, most of the tools that are used by industry to make games today are free. They're completely free to download and to use. So, you know, it depends on the type of computer that you have. But for example, GMS2, which is Game Maker Studio 2, it's made here in Dundee. It's free for people to use, and it will run on anything. It'll run on a toaster. So if a young person doesn't have a great computer, it's fine. There are tools out there to start game making. If they've got a PS4 at home, they can download Dreams, which is an amazing game art animation making tool that you can download directly onto a PlayStation 4 and start making games with straight away. So you don't need to have amazing equipment. It's really easy to get started. You can start, as Carol said, with paper. Industry use paper to make paper prototypes. It's really easy just to get started, start making games and thinking about that game design and game development process. And my final point, because I know I'm running out of time here and there's people for the next event already waiting, get young people to join the Into Games Discord. If you don't know what Discord is, it's essentially a community building platform where people with similar interests can get together, communicate, talk, join events, join panels, collaborate on projects and things together. And we have one of 6,000 plus strong industry professionals, career seekers, young people, anyone who's interested about learning about careers in the games industry. And we run live panels on there every single week with industry professionals where you can ask them direct questions about getting into the games industry. Q&As as well with, as I said, studio heads, like major figures in industry, talking about the work that they do, how they got into the industry, as well as kind of like all of these other kind of discipline-specific people. As well as that, we have discipline-specific channels. So once you've got that young person to go onto the Into Games website and they say, I want to be a sound designer, you can send them to the sound design channel, where they can take part in weekly design workouts, where we create briefs for young people to be able to create pieces of work, build their portfolio, get feedback from industry about the pieces of work that they're making. All of this, by the way, is completely free to access, as is everything that we do at Into Games. So there's no paywall, there's no payment or anything you need to do. All of it's freely accessible. Excuse me. So get young people on the Into Games Discord. It's a really great way to do all of that stuff that I just said before, whether it's speaking to an industry professional, creating a piece of work, building an online presence, creating a portfolio, all super easy stuff to do. And you can join the Into Games Discord from the age of 13. And it's a wonderful, inclusive, safe space for young people to be able to kind of, learn what it is that they love about making games. So to recap, Get them confident in the role. Go on the Into Games website, learn about the 150 plus roles there are in the games industry, and find what it is that they love doing and the thing that they're passionate about. Next one, find other virtual work experiences or learn elsewhere. There's free online courses. You can get young people involved in our virtual work experience programs. You can learn transferable skills in another job. I hated my job at CEX for 2 years, but it taught me a lot of different things about communicating with people. And there are things that I take forward from my toilet cleaning job at the Blair Drummond Safari Park. Maybe not that one, actually. But you learn amazing, transferable, useful skills in all of the jobs that you do, doesn't matter what it is. And telling a young person that there's value in their cafe job or whatever is really important. Next up, build a portfolio, join game jams, make games. You got to start making games if you want to get into the games industry, however small that may be. Seems like a really daunting task, but when you can literally download a game on your PlayStation 4 and start making games with it within an hour, it makes it seem a little bit more accessible. And build an online presence, showcase your skills, create a portfolio, constantly be learning, constantly be updating it, constantly getting feedback from industry. The games industry, by and large, is really inclusive and wants people to come to them. Because it's so competitive and hard to get in, a lot of people don't want to pull the ladder up behind them and they want to make it easier for the next person to get into their role. So reach out to people. They're always keen to talk and to collaborate and give feedback. And finally, join Into Games Discord. It's intogames.org/Discord. It's super easy to remember. You can Google it and search it. Any young person who's interested in making games or starting a career in the games industry, this is the central place that you should be sending them because it's full of constantly updated, fun, interactive things for young people to get involved with and do. And I think I'm pressing next and there's nothing left. So that must be me. So yeah, huge thank you, everyone. Cheers. It's been wonderful.
I just see the granny saying that, well, what the hell is she just talking about? So actually to see that coming from somebody that's in the industry, have up there with the amazing for me to have.
Yeah, of course. No, we'll share this deck on the Eventbrite afterwards, and to all those who are watching online as well. We'll share all of this information plus some more resources afterwards. ScreenSkills have some great stuff as well that they've not talked about that you'll be able to get access to as well. So yeah, we'll share all of that stuff and just reach out as well. hello@intogames.org. You'll be able to find it on the website. If you've got any questions, any queries, you want to know more. Yeah, so, and sign up to the video games ambassadors. You can literally within a couple of days get an industry professional to come to your school or college, university and deliver a talk about the work that they do. They're a much better place to do that than me. I'm not a game developer. So I think that's all we've got time for, folks. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along. It's been really great. This is Dundee is my hometown, and it's been really lovely to put on an event in my city and bring lots of wonderful people who live and work in Dundee as well, and the rest of Scotland to talk about the wonderful Scottish games industry, and kind of hopefully give you guys some useful information about how you can help young people get excited and inspired to pursue a career in games. I'm gonna have to kind of like be that guy. You're gonna have to go, but yeah, huge thank you, everyone.